At first glance, it looked like an ordinary family portrait from Quebec in the early 1900s. A father, a mother, their children all posed in perfect stillness for the camera. But then, in the reflection of a stained glass window behind them, something impossible was captured. A raised hand, a terrified child, a truth that was never meant to be seen. What really happened inside the Dumont mansion that winter night? Before we reveal the chilling details, drop a comment below. Do you believe photographs can capture more than just appearances? Can they hold a family's darkest secrets? Anna Lavoie was no stranger to dusty archives, forgotten boxes, and the eerie silence of abandoned estates. As a cultural journalist in Quebec City, she had built her reputation on uncovering overlooked fragments of the past and breathing new life into them through her articles. But nothing in her career had prepared her for the day she found the Dumont glass plate. It began in the quiet storeroom of a retired collector. Anna had been invited to browse his collection of antique photographs for a feature on the fading art of early photography. Most of the boxes contained portraits of stiff-faced families, weddings, and the occasional military officer proudly in uniform. They were ordinary, predictable relics of another time. But one particular box was different. Its lid creaked open to reveal an old collodion glass plate, the image faint but intact. As Anna held it up to the light, her breath caught. At first glance, it was nothing unusual. A wealthy Quebec family posed in their parlor, the year roughly 1903, judging by the fashion. A stern-looking father sat rigidly in a carved wooden chair, his wife perched elegantly beside him, children neatly arranged. But in the reflection of a stained glass panel behind them, the kind often built into private chapels, something else emerged. The father's arm was raised high, frozen mid-strike. The eldest son flinched, eyes wide with terror. The mother's hand reached out in desperation, her face contorted, not in a smile, but in fear. Anna lowered the plate, her heart pounding. She tilted it again, convinced her eyes were deceiving her. The main scene remained calm, composed. Yet in the reflection, a hidden truth screamed through the glass. She felt a shiver crawl down her spine. This was no accident of light. The collector, unaware of what he possessed, shrugged. That one's always given me a strange feeling, he admitted, but I never found a buyer for it. Too unsettling, perhaps. Anna knew she couldn't leave it behind. She purchased the plate and spent the rest of the day in restless anticipation. Who were these people? Why had such a disturbing image been created, and how had it survived more than a century? That night, as snow blanketed the city outside her apartment, Anna enlarged the image on her lightbox, studying every detail. The children's formal clothing suggested affluence. The woman's jewelry hinted at old money. And then she saw something else. Etched faintly at the bottom corner was a photographer's mark, A. Roy. She recognized the name. Alfred Roy had been one of Quebec's earliest photographers, known for documenting not only portraits, but also news events for the local papers. The discovery set her mind racing. If Alfred Roy had been involved, this was not just an ordinary family photo. He was a man who understood evidence, who knew how to preserve truth in images. But why would he risk keeping something so incriminating? Anna needed answers. She dug into local records, searching through directories from 1903, and soon found a match. Charles Dumont, owner of a prosperous printing press in Quebec City. Married to Madeleine, father of several children, respected in both business and church circles. It was his face in the photograph, his hand raised in the reflection. The Dumont mansion still stood, a faded relic on Rue Saint-Stanislas, though much of it had been closed off for decades. Family descendants rarely spoke of the estate, except to say it had been in decline since the early 20th century. Anna reached out to a local historian she trusted, Étienne Dumont, who happened to be a distant relative of Charles. When she showed him a scan of the glass plate, his reaction was immediate. His skin paled and his eyes flicked from the image to her face with a mixture of shock and dread. You found this," he whispered. "We thought it was lost forever." His voice carried not just surprise but fear, as though the photograph itself carried a curse. Anna pressed him for answers, and after a long pause, Etienne agreed to meet her at the old Dumont mansion the following afternoon. "There are things you need to see," he said gravely. "Things my family has kept hidden for generations." As Anna prepared for that meeting, unease gnawed at her. She had stumbled onto a secret buried under a century of silence, a portrait that was never meant to surface again, and yet here it was in her hands, demanding to be understood. What had really happened in the Dumont household on that Christmas of 1903? And what would she discover inside the crumbling mansion where the stained glass no longer stood? But its shadow still lingered. The next day promised answers, but also dangers she had not yet imagined. The following afternoon, Anna made her way through Quebec's narrow streets, the snow crunching beneath her boots as she approached the Dumont mansion. The building loomed ahead, its brick facade weathered by time, tall windows sealed shut, and the iron gates rusted yet still holding an air of faded dignity. The closer she drew, the heavier the atmosphere became, as if the house itself carried the weight of its secrets. Etienne was waiting at the entrance wrapped in a heavy wool coat, his expression grim. He unlocked the gate with a key that seemed too small for the imposing door. Inside, the air was cold and stale, thick with the smell of old wood and disuse. They walked down a dim corridor until they entered the grand parlor, the very room from the photograph. Anna paused, her breath catching. The once ornate wallpaper was faded, peeling in places, but she recognized the floral pattern instantly from the photograph. Where the stained glass window had once stood there was now only an empty frame sealed with plain boards, the colorful panes removed long ago. Yet the outline of the original wooden casement remained like a scar left behind. Light filtered in, faintly highlighting dust that swirled in the air like restless spirits. "This is where it happened," Etienne said quietly. His voice echoed slightly in the hollow room. "The portrait. The reflection, the beginning of a tragedy my family tried to forget." From a locked cabinet, he pulled out a leather-bound journal. Its pages were yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. He set it carefully on the table, sliding it toward Anna. "This belonged to Madeleine Dumont, my great-great-grandmother. She never spoke publicly about what happened, but she wrote everything down here. My grandfather preserved it, insisting that one day someone should know the truth." Anna's hands trembled as she opened the book. The handwriting was delicate, almost elegant, yet the words revealed a story drenched in fear. She read aloud, her voice steady despite the chill running down her spine. "December 25th, 1903. Alfred Roy came to photograph us for Christmas. Charles insisted everything be perfect, his reputation immaculate. The children obeyed, though Lucien appeared restless. Charles adjusted our positions carefully, ensuring the stained glass window would display the image of our family's prosperity. But just as Roy prepared his equipment, Charles began shouting at Lucien for his failures at school, his disrespect. The argument grew violent. At the moment the flash erupted, Charles raised his hand against our son. The photograph shows what our eyes witnessed, but society must never know." Anna lifted her gaze to Etienne, who stood motionless, his jaw tight. The weight of the words filled the room with a suffocating silence. She turned the page, unable to stop. "December 28th, 1903. Roy showed us the developed plate. The reflection betrayed us, betrayed Charles. He demanded its destruction, but Roy refused. He insisted truth could not be erased, though he never said the word. Charles raged, offered him money, then threats. I fear for Roy and for us. Lucien hides bruises upon his arms. The children are frightened, and I no longer know how to protect them." Anna felt her throat tighten as she imagined Madeleine writing by candlelight, trapped in silence, in a society where a woman's voice carried little weight against a powerful man like Charles Dumont. The parlor suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing inward, echoing with the cries of children long gone. Etienne's voice broke the silence. "It doesn't end there. You should read the final entries." Anna turned to the last dated page. The words seemed to tremble on the page themselves. "December 31st, 1903. Charles attacked Roy tonight in his studio. They say Roy's jaw and ribs are broken. Charles returned home bloodied, claiming Roy had struck first, but I saw the glint of triumph in his eyes. Later that night he fell from the staircase. The servants whispered it was the drink that betrayed him, but I know the truth. Lucien was there at the top of the stairs, my son who has suffered so greatly. I cannot write more." Anna closed the journal slowly, her pulse thundering in her ears. She looked at Etienne, who reached into his coat and pulled out another document, a folded letter, brittle with age. "This was written by Lucien to his mother 2 decades later," he said. "Read it." Anna unfolded the paper, the ink dark and deliberate. "Dearest mother, you have always suspected. I cannot carry this secret to my grave. Yes, I pushed him. That night when he returned gloating, threatening to do worse to us all, something in me broke. I was 16, terrified, but I acted to protect you and the others. I have carried this burden all my life, and yet I would not change it." Anna's vision blurred as she finished. The confession transformed the reflection in the photograph from eerie accident to living testimony, a frozen moment that had unraveled an entire family. Etienne poured 2 glasses of brandy from a crystal decanter that seemed as old as the house itself. His hand shook slightly as he handed one to Anna. "Lucien lived as a priest," he said softly. "He dedicated his life to children, perhaps to atone. My grandfather remembered him as gentle, nothing like his father. But the weight of that night never left him." Anna stared into her glass, the amber liquid catching the weak afternoon light. The Dumont story was no longer just a curiosity. It was a legacy of violence, silence, and guilt that had rippled across generations. And yet one question gnawed at her mind: what had become of Alfred Roy, the photographer who dared to preserve the truth? That question would soon lead her deeper into the mystery than she had ever expected, drawing her toward Montreal, where Roy's descendants still kept his most disturbing collection. 2 days later, Anna arrived in Montreal, her train pulling into the Gare Centrale, as dusk painted the city in shades of violet and gold. The air was sharper here, the streets alive with the clatter of carriages and the glow of gas lamps flickering against falling snow. She had arranged to meet Henri Roy, the grandson of the photographer whose lens had captured the Dumonts' hidden truth. Henri's gallery occupied a converted warehouse in the city's south end, an unassuming structure from the outside, but transformed within. When Henri greeted her at the door, Anna was struck by his sharp eyes, icy blue, unwavering, the kind that seemed to see beneath the surface. Though in his late 70s, his posture was still strong, his voice steady. "So," he said, "you're the one who uncovered the Dumont portrait." Inside the gallery was astonishing. Hundreds of photographs lined the walls, their black and white surfaces glinting faintly under the glow of electric lamps. Anna stepped closer to one, an elegant wedding portrait from 1905. At first it looked ordinary, but then she saw it in the mirror behind the bride. Her reflection showed not a smile, but tears streaming down her cheeks. Anna's skin prickled as if touched by invisible hands. Henri watched her reaction closely. "My grandfather became obsessed after Charles Dumont attacked him," he explained. "He believed that certain emotions, fear, rage, despair, were so powerful they etched themselves into photographic plates, not illusions, not tricks, but truths the eye could not or would not see." Anna moved along the display, drawn deeper into the strange collection. A Christmas scene from 1907, where the children's shadows on the wall twisted into shapes of raised fists and cowering figures. A 1909 business meeting where, in the reflection of polished wood, one man appeared to lunge at another with murderous intent. The photographs whispered of hidden conflicts, private wars that respectable faces tried to conceal. She turned back to Henri, her voice hushed. "These can't all be real." "They are," he said firmly. "Verified by experts, studied by skeptics. None found evidence of manipulation." My grandfather was not alone. Other photographers began to notice the same anomalies, but most dismissed them as accidents or faults in the plates. He, however, kept records, notes, interviews, even medical reports. He built a case that photographs sometimes captured the truth beneath appearances. Henri led her to a locked cabinet at the back of the room. With a small brass key, he opened it, revealing a thick folder labeled Dumont Case 1903. He laid it out on a long oak table. Inside were multiple copies of the original Dumont portrait, along with clippings, handwritten accounts from servants, and even hospital records of Alfred Roy's injuries. The careful documentation painted a chilling picture of Charles Dumont's tyranny, the community's silence, and the photographer's refusal to destroy evidence. But there was something else. An old map of Quebec and New England dotted with red pins. Henri tapped the page. Each pin marks a photograph between 1900 and 1910 that showed these kinds of anomalies. "Look here." His finger traced a dense cluster. Quebec City, Montreal, and most of all, Salem. Anna leaned closer, her breath quickening. The pins were not random. They formed clusters around towns marked by deep historical trauma. Salem, infamous for the witch trials of 1692, was choked with them. Henri's eyes glinted as he explained. "My grandfather believed some places carry emotional residue, memories of suffering, betrayal, fear that seep into the present. Salem was a place of inherited guilt and suspicion. Families there carried wounds for centuries. In their portraits, the past bled into the glass. He pulled another photograph from the folder. It showed a Salem family in 1906, their poses stiff and formal, but in the parlor mirror behind them, one child appeared to scream silently, his mouth wide with terror. Henri pointed to the back of the print where meticulous notes described the family's history. The father, a descendant of one of the witch trial judges, had a reputation for cruelty. Domestic violence had threaded through generations of that bloodline. Anna felt her stomach turn. So these images weren't supernatural. They were psychological truths, she murmured. Precisely, Henri replied. The camera doesn't lie. It doesn't flatter. It sees what we refuse to admit. He then revealed one last photograph kept separate in its own envelope. It was a group portrait of Salem's town council in 1904. In the posed image, the men stood stiff and dignified, faces stern. But in the mirror behind them, their reflections revealed contorted expressions. Hands pointing in accusation, mouths twisted in rage. These men all knew about Charles Dumont, Henri said. They debated whether to investigate his death. The official records describe calm discussion, yet the mirror shows the violence beneath their guilt, their complicity, their cowardice. Anna stared at the photograph, feeling the walls of the gallery closing in. The Dumont case was no longer an isolated family tragedy. It was part of a greater pattern, a hidden history encoded in glass and silver nitrate. Henri leaned back, folding his arms. The question is, why did that particular portrait of the Dumonts survive? It passed through hands, vanished, resurfaced, always returning to the family or those connected to it, almost as if it wanted its truth to be told. Anna thought of how the photograph had called to her from the attic, how her pulse had quickened when she first touched it. It felt less like coincidence and more like design, as though the image itself had waited patient and watchful for someone willing to see. But beneath the fascination lay unease. If photographs could reveal truths hidden even from the people within them, what did that mean for the thousands of portraits collecting dust in attics, libraries, and museums across the world? Anna looked at Henri, and for the first time she understood the Dumont portrait was not the end of a mystery. It was the beginning of something much larger, something that reached into the very heart of memory, history, and guilt, and she was now entangled in it. Winter settled heavily over Salem. When Anna arrived months later, the town's crooked streets glazed with ice, the church steeples rising like dark spires against a pale sky. She had been invited to present her findings at the Salem Historical Society, but even before her lecture began, she felt the pull of the town's buried history. Salem was quiet in January, the tourist crowds gone, leaving behind an air of waiting. It was as though the ground itself carried whispers of the past. The auditorium of the society was modest but packed. Scholars of photography, historians of the witch trials, journalists, and curious locals filled the seats. On the stage, illuminated by the amber glow of gaslight, hung the Dumont family portrait. Its glassy surface reflected the audience back at themselves, reminding each of them that this was not simply a picture of strangers, it was a mirror to truth. Anna took the podium, her voice measured but steady. She began with the ordinary facts: a Christmas photograph from 1903, a family posing stiffly in Quebec. Then she let the unease creep in. The reflection in the stained glass window, she explained, revealed not harmony but violence. Charles Dumont's hand raised against his son Madeleine's terror, the children recoiling. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the audience. She guided them through Madeleine's diary entries, her trembling descriptions of bruises, of silence, of fear. She read aloud from Lucien's confession letter, his tortured admission that he had pushed his father down the stairs to save his family. The words struck the audience like blows, each sentence peeling away layers of respectability that history had wrapped around the Dumonts. But Anna did not stop with one family. She widened the lens. She spoke of Alfred Roy, beaten nearly to death for daring to preserve the truth. She revealed the other photographs Henri had shown her: the bride whose reflection wept the family, whose shadows revealed violence, the councilmen whose mirror selves raged while their posed faces remained still. As she spoke, tension built in the room like a drumbeat. She pointed to the map of anomalies that cluster around Salem. She reminded them that Salem was no stranger to fear, disguised as order to communities preserving silence at the cost of justice. What we see in these photographs, she told them, is not the supernatural. It is the truth that societies choose to bury, and truth, like water, finds a way to seep through cracks, staining the record whether we wish it or not. For a long moment after she finished, the hall was utterly silent. Then came the applause, thunderous and sustained, echoing off the high plaster ceiling. In the front row, Etienne sat with his teenage daughter, Marianne. His eyes glistened as he reached for her hand. At last, the secret that had haunted his family for generations was spoken aloud. After the presentation, visitors crowded the stage to see the portrait up close. Children seemed especially drawn to it, tugging at their parents' hands. One little girl, no more than 8, pressed her nose near the glass, her finger pointing to Lucien's distorted reflection. "It's like he's warning us," she whispered, her voice carrying through the hushed room. Anna felt a chill, the kind of chill that meant the truth was speaking, if only people would listen. In a quiet corner, Dr. Ashford, a historian who had mentored Anna during her research, leaned close. "This case will reshape how we think about evidence. Not only written documents, not only oral histories, but images that capture the psychology of a moment. You've opened a door, Anna. Others will walk through." Henri Roy had flown from Montreal with a briefcase heavy with other anomalies. After the lecture, he opened it for scholars, journalists, anyone curious enough to look. More photographs emerged, new evidence of hidden violence, suppressed fear rage beneath the surface of polished smiles. And each image raised the same question. How many portraits tucked away in attics and archives carried truths waiting to be seen? As the crowd thinned and the lights dimmed, Anna lingered at the front of the hall, staring at the Dumont portrait in its frame. The glass caught her reflection alongside theirs, merging her face with Madeleine's weary eyes, Lucien's terrified stare. She wondered if she too was now part of the photograph's long story, a chain of witnesses stretching across more than a century. The Dumont tragedy had found its voice, but Anna sensed something larger beneath it, an undertow she could not yet name. If these images carried truths across time, what else might they carry? Regret, rage warnings. And were their truths so terrible they should remain buried? Her heart beat faster as she turned away from the portrait, knowing the story was not finished. Salem had given her answers, but it had also left her with more questions. Questions that whispered of other photographs, other families, other mirrors still hiding their secrets. The mirror, it seemed, had not finished speaking. In Henri Roy's gallery, the story deepened. The old man, spry despite his years, guided Anna past rows of strange photographs, faces blurred where they should not be, shadows out of place, reflections that told other stories. He paused before a locked case and carefully withdrew a folder. "These," he said, "are the Dumont records kept by my grandfather, Alfred Roy." Henri spoke with reverence. After Charles Dumont's attack, my grandfather, Alfred Roy, was changed forever. He could no longer take ordinary portraits. He began documenting what he called photographic truths, images where the film seemed to record not just the surface, but the hidden emotions beneath. He devised meticulous techniques to authenticate them, proving they were not manipulated. He believed extreme trauma left an imprint strong enough to disturb the chemical process of the plate itself. Anna studied the samples. In one wedding photo from 1905, the bride's reflection wept, though she smiled. In another, a child's mirror image screamed silently while his body sat stiff in a chair. The haunting detail was enhanced by the fragile glass plate's faint glows where the emulsion seemed bruised, as if the photograph itself carried a wound. Only after Anna absorbed these did Henri reveal the map, New England dotted with red pins clusters, circling places with heavy histories. His finger pressed to Salem. Here the patterns converge. My grandfather noticed anomalies erupting around Salem more than anywhere else. He believed it was no coincidence. He pulled out one final photograph, Salem's council, in 1904. The men sat stern, dignified, but in the mirror behind them, they argued viciously, faces twisted, one pointing an accusatory finger. "These men knew about Charles Dumont," Henri said grimly. "They chose silence. Official minutes show calm discussion, but the mirror my grandfather's plate revealed the rage and fear underneath. The camera testified when people would not." Anna felt a chill run through her. The Dumont portrait was not isolated. It was part of a web proof of collective denial, and now, after more than a century, it had found its way back, demanding to be heard. The days that followed in Salem blurred into a strange mixture of feverish research and sleepless nights. Anna remained restless, her mind circling around the unanswered questions left by the Dumont portrait. The image had traveled across decades, reappearing again and again as though resisting burial. It seemed alive, almost insistent, like a witness unwilling to stay silent. She found herself drawn back to the archives, chasing every thread Henri and Ashford had uncovered. There were municipal records of Charles Dumont's business ventures showing a man obsessed with appearances. There were letters from neighbors polite on the surface, but threaded with unease, noting arguments, sudden silences, unexplained injuries. The more she read, the clearer it became. The Dumont's tragedy was not isolated. It was the product of a community that preferred to look away rather than confront a man of influence. Late one evening, Anna stumbled upon a sealed envelope tucked inside a ledger from 1907. The handwriting was faint but legible, to be opened only if the truth is denied. Inside was a note signed by one of Salem's council members admitting they had known of Charles Dumont's violence and had chosen to suppress any inquiry into his death. Their justification was chilling, to protect the town's reputation. Anna felt the blood drain from her face as she realized the portrait was more than evidence of private cruelty. It was proof of collective complicity, a whole society built on silence. At the same time, Henri was compiling his grandfather's scattered files, piecing together decades of obsessive study. He showed Anna more anomalies, a family portrait from 1906 where a child's reflection screamed while his body sat still. A wedding photograph from 1905 where the bride's mirror image wept through her smile. A council chamber image from 1904 where men's reflections erupted in violence, though their bodies sat dignified and calm. Each one, he explained, had been authenticated, studied by experts who swore no manipulation was involved. This was not accident. Henri insisted, his voice trembling with conviction. It was testimony. The camera, the chemicals, the light they captured, truth the eye refused to see. My grandfather believed trauma leaves an imprint like heat scorching glass. And here in Salem, where history itself bleeds with fear, those imprints multiply. Anna stared at the evidence spread before her: letters, photographs, diaries, confessions. It was overwhelming. Yet beneath the horror, she felt a strange sense of clarity. The Dumont portrait was not just a relic, it was a beacon pointing to the stories that had been buried beneath respectability. 3 months later, she stood once again before the Salem Historical Society, this time addressing an even larger crowd. Word of the Dumont case had spread through universities' newspapers and whispered conversations. Scholars, skeptics, and the merely curious filled the hall, waiting to hear how a single family photograph had unraveled more than a century of silence. The Dumont portrait was displayed behind her, glowing under the soft museum lights. Anna spoke of Madeleine's diary, of Lucien's confession, of Alfred Roy's shattered jaw and relentless determination. She revealed the council members' secret note, proof that Salem's leaders had chosen silence over justice. She explained Henri's theory of trauma imprinting itself onto photographic plates, and she showed the anomalies: weddings, family portraits, council meetings that betrayed the truths people had tried to hide. Her words rose and fell with intensity, pulling the audience with her. She described the ordinary moment of a photograph, the staged smiles, the flash of light, and then the extraordinary revelation of what lingered beneath. By the time she finished, the room was hushed, the air heavy with recognition. In the front row, Etienne sat with his daughter Marianne. Their faces reflected both grief and release. The weight of generations had shifted, silence had been broken. After the lecture, as visitors crowded around the portrait, children once again were the first to notice the reflection. One small girl tugged her mother's sleeve, pointing to Lucien's terrified face. "It looks like he's trying to tell us something," she whispered. Anna felt her throat tighten. For 120 years, the photograph had been trying to do exactly that. As the evening ended and the crowd dispersed, Anna lingered in the hall. The Dumont family seemed almost alive under the lamplight, their story finally complete. Charles's cruelty exposed, Madeleine's suffering acknowledged, Lucien's burden understood. And yet the questions lingered about the nature of truth, about trauma's persistence, about how many other portraits still held their secrets. Ashford joined her, his voice low. "You've shown us that history hides in plain sight. But remember, once truth is revealed, it cannot be forgotten. The responsibility now belongs to us all." Anna nodded, her eyes fixed on the mirror in the portrait. For a moment she thought she saw her own reflection staring back differently, as though she too had been absorbed into the long chain of witnesses. The mirror had kept its secret for more than a century, but secrets, she knew now, never stayed buried forever. Truth finds its way through cracks in the silence. Sometimes justice comes slowly, but it comes nonetheless, etched in glass, captured in silver, waiting for someone brave enough to see.